Welcome to the channel. I'm Rick Rayner Jr. and by day, I'm a door-to-door salesman, so rejection and acceptance are two languages I'm very familiar with. I'm also a writer, sort of an educator, I guess, and with that said, I use YouTube as a platform to reach an audience that's interested in fresh perspectives, self-help, personal analysis, strategic growth, and much more. All in all, I'm happy you're here. And if you're new to the channel, this video is a segment to a 5-part series I've started called The First 5. Think Like a Programmer is this week's actual content. Now with this week's video topic, I need you to think creatively when you start trying to make links and connections with the analogies used. If you've ever heard of a programmer, then you know exactly what they work with. Mostly computers and programming languages. Yes, they do work with a whole suite of tools and resources, but for the programmer to program, you and I can say there are two significant parts to the success of a computer engineer. Although the computer only understands zeros and ones, yes, there's tools and software built to function like translators. That way a programmer can utilize computer languages invented to communicate with the computer, so that it can run tasks, run software, and so on. For example, Windows operating system, kernel, and obviously system libraries are built using languages like C, C++, and now I hear Rust has been squeezing through the line, sort of like Frank Gore used to with the 49ers offense. Hate me for it. Together, the trio of languages, programming languages like C, C++, and Rust, manifest the tabs, windows, files, images, etc., all within a Windows computer. With that said, welcome to part 1 of T.L.A.P, or in other words, Think Like a Programmer. Section 1 is identifying your first internal library. Language model. Now, depending on where you're born, usually has a huge impact on the first language you'll learn in life, or in other words, growing up as a kid. See, I was born in the US, but as a Mexican American, Spanish was not my first language that I learned. Only because I was so nosy as a kid, my parents quickly found out that they needed a secret language. So, English was my first lingo, while Spanish was a tongue I had to learn as I grew up. Now, what's the point of pointing that out, right? Well, much like a programmer learns programming languages to communicate with the computer, it's sort of like you as a kid are naturally expected to do as well, except with people, teachers, family members, etc. You pick up the language of the nation you live in, or the first language of your ethnicity, and so on. So, yes, think to yourself, what was the language I learned as a kid? If it was English, great. Whatever language it is or was, consider that the first programming language you learned in life. So also, yes, consider that your first internal library language model. We could also say the language you talk daily with your loved ones is probably different than the one you use with coworkers or classmates, and so on. Let's change our perspective from words to a practical concept. For example, can you and I agree that there is even a language to learning in general? Like the language someone would speak when they have a growth mindset versus someone who believes the opposite of having a growth mindset. Still not clicking yet? Let's go a step further. Someone with a growth mindset is asked, can you build a training program? Someone with a growth mindset answers, I've never built one before, but I can learn. Someone without a growth mindset would answer, perhaps, no, that's too far outside of my scope. I can't do it. And the amount of bias from some people thinking right now is probably untamed now. Like we mentioned earlier, a programmer needs to communicate with a computer. And if theoretically, reality is like a computer for you, and the first language you learned, which is simultaneously like a programming language you need to use to change the realities around you, then my question is, how would you approach changing the realities around you. Now, this may sound really off topic, but I promise you it's not. Have you ever wondered how a mom is naturally a mom? Like a female puppy that you got as a kid finally is all grown up. Then she gets knocked up by Chancho next door. Then when it's time to give birth, the puppy you used to know is now a mother, mothering her babies. It's so natural and in a very huge sense, beautiful and kind of an interesting thought to ponder. Here's a theory. Could we say that the instincts of that puppy who grew up to become a mother or father also had instincts within him or her to be a mother or a father? My next question is, how many instincts do you think you have as a normal human being? Here are some examples of what I mean. We could perhaps say that 98% of people have the natural instinct to learn. Otherwise, if we didn't, I'm pretty sure the human race would have died off about 1,000, maybe even 100 years ago. Or you and I have the natural instinct, like a puppy who grows up and becomes a parent, to parent our own children, right? What we're getting at is, could you and I both agree and say that perhaps instincts are dormant until there's a direct necessity for them to behave, function, or exist? What if I told you, you always could write, you just didn't know it? Or you have always had the instinct to build something unique and fulfilling, you just didn't apply yourself? Just like school, let's theoretically say that teachers go to school sometimes not knowing that they're learning how to teach people or kids how to use what people or kids already have within themselves, dormant, but that stuff is just dormant until there's a light or a brain or a mind or heart or thought shined upon it. For the sake of this video, we're going to think of instincts like a language model, just like you as a kid had to learn your first language to speak. For our first language models, the instincts we're focusing on are the underlying models that make or break your wins and failures, aka learning and growth. Welcome to section 2. The question that we want to try to answer is, how is your understanding tied to the psychological aspect of life, and how is it an asset to your habitual, emotional, and self-awareness language models? Mind you, when we're referencing language models, we're thinking about it like a communication tool. To try and get anywhere near answering the question for this section, and to attempt to think like a programmer, the second aspect, or most core aspects of thinking like a programmer, is not just to be a thinker, but to take on the glorifying challenge to also become an excellent problem solver, logical, creative, and critical thinker, whilst also learning to think algorithmically. Because together, those skills provide you the opportunities to break down situations into chunks of information or building blocks, and ultimately end up finding some type of solution to simple and or complex problems. Now, how would your learning and growing instincts benefit from what we just said? And how are those instincts an asset to your habitual, emotional, and self-awareness language models? Probably the next question. So, for starters, learning and growing is a natural part of life, but not everybody benefits from it. And much like storyline video games, where you, as the player, get to experience an imaginative world where just about anything is possible. What if to some degree you carried that same mindset in real life, where anything really is possible, and no matter how hard the game gets, you keep trying to beat whatever level it is you either get stuck on, have a hard time figuring out, etc. In real life, yes, things happen. The difference is people that actively search for solutions solve problems in many different ways. So perhaps without any type of understanding of your habituals, emotions, or self-awareness, how do the problems of life, routine, change, randomness, etc. get solved? For one, you could start by maximizing perhaps your power of writing, journaling, or using your words, right? The existing language model you have, as far as English or Spanish, whatever it is, your communication tool, using your skills like thinking, brainstorming, ideation, practicality, and by drawing a fine line of imaginative and creative processes even. Hence, what brings us to the last section of today's video. Section 3, finding peace in the chaos by categorizing knowledge, skills, wisdom, memories, etc. You're probably thinking, how the hell does any of this stuff tie into thinking like a programmer? Well, if you made it this far, then the subject matter is tickling your learning instinct already. Let's briefly recap the 2 previous sections. In section 1, we framed our thinking on the concept that whatever language we learn as a kid, whether it be English or whatever the case may be, then, like a programmer, we have the communication tool already to start changing the realities around ourselves. But the point we made is to change those realities around you. It could start with how you use your existing communication tools, like through writing, brainstorming ideas, or getting practical and breaking down problems into smaller blocks of information. In section 2, we focused our perspective on 3 important aspects of life that always seem to be acting or behaving like chaos. Then we explored the thoughts and questions regarding our understanding of those 3 aspects and what or why the potential of learning and growing ties into thinking like a programmer when it comes to being logical, reasoning, thinking creatively, and cross-referencing video games as a way to connect emotionally. In section 3, we want to attempt to get more practical with methodologies and a philosophy to help you categorize things by level of importance and necessity. Otherwise, if there's no necessity, you don't need to be watching this video, right? So another important aspect of thinking like a programmer would consist of one other thing that's always been super intriguing to me. It's called databases. It's like our military sets up a military base, except in our case, it's a place to theorize, reason, mind dump, practice thinking and learning, studying, and the list goes on. So here's a short story. Some years back, I felt like my brain was full of ideas and thoughts and information, etc. But I wasn't sure what to do with all of it, even though I was getting headaches, migraines, and sort of getting sick in a way that it caused me to press the brakes on everything I was doing to solve a legitimate problem. I asked family members, friends, random people sometimes, and searched the internet for anything until I found a couple different solutions. One was to build a second brain, and I came upon that through Tiago Forte and a few others. Number 2 was to categorize notes and just dump whatever is in your mind on some digital paper, then go back and sift through the information to see if anything makes sense. The third thing was to brainstorm and mind map more often to explore ideas, thoughts, and so on. And the fourth was to spend time journaling daily, no matter what you journal about. And the fifth was to build a knowledge, wisdom, skill, memory, and learning library to lay out thoughts in a strategic manner upon which I tried all solutions and pretty much juggled through each of them. Now, since this video is already pretty long, I'll briefly express how each of them can tie in together so we can keep it simple. Overall, platforms like Notion and Obsidian and many others allow for people like you and me that believe in the significance of continuous learning and growth to build humongous databases of information that is not only theoretical, but practical, idealistic, or useful, but also categorical. For instance, if you get an idea to, I don't know, create a new online course, then I'd most likely, what? Start brainstorming, right? Start a brainstorming page or a vision board or an outline, a rough draft of expectations, and so on and so forth. Then maybe I'd mind dump what I already, without a doubt, understand about the topic that I want to frame a course around. So I create a new page and can start by categorizing experience, knowledge, deep, high, and low level understanding, and you get the picture. As I have gone through the first steps, I may start one and start over, or start one and continue, then begin the journaling phases about research, observations, analysis, etc. Once I believe I have enough data stored in the database, it's time to start what? Scripting, drafting, practicing, chat GPTing questions, thoughts, etc. to find different perspectives or ideas, and then package and film, edit until it's complete and I'm confident in the project overall. This could take days, weeks, months, years even. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, think about this subject matter creatively. Just because I used an example of getting an idea to create an online course doesn't mean the strategy overall can't be used when getting a business idea. I personally don't mind taking risks and moving forward without questions or thinking, while I also understand the importance of uploading subject matter like this ethically should have a good amount of thought and research behind it, right? So another thing is calculated risks are super beneficial. And a lot of the times I read or checked podcasts out where people think in certain ways and it just makes sense. Here's another thing to think about, or another thought to ponder. Fame companies don't become fame companies because they're not strategic, right? New features are built, updated, and released all the dang time. With that said, be sure to watch this video over and over until you can connect the dots. Some things are abstract for good purpose, maybe to be thought-provoking. Anyways, use this video to think, approach, and answer this week's questions in the best way you possibly can. See you in the next video.